Okay, let's get right into it. Consider, one of the most basic lines from the Bible. You shall have no other gods before me. When you first hear that, what comes to mind? Probably something about exclusivity, maybe? A strict rule?
Yeah, exactly. Strictness, maybe even a bit limiting.
Right. Well, this deep dive, it's based on this really interesting YouTube source you found, and it kind of unpacks that commandment. Honestly, it might shift how you see it.
Oh, it definitely offers a fresh perspective. Because, it sounds so absolute on the surface, doesn't it? But to really get the potential deeper meaning, we have to go back, way back, like 3,500 years ago, ancient Near East.
Okay.
And you got to picture the world then. It was a place where having lots of gods, well, that was just normal. Gods for your family, your tribe, your nation.
Yeah, specific gods for specific things.
Totally. It was the absolute norm, the only reality people knew, basically.
So just imagine that. Everyone around you believes in a whole host of gods. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, comes this declaration saying, actually, hold on, only one God should be worshipped. Mm-hmm. How incredibly radical must that have sounded in that world?
Hugely radical. It wasn't just like adding another rule. It was a fundamental challenge to how people understood the cosmos.
Exactly. And this source material helps us dig into why. Why make such a revolutionary claim? What could it have meant beyond just follow this rule?
And this is where the source makes a really, really crucial distinction. It changes the whole frame. It argues the declaration wasn't simply saying, okay, pick our God, stick with him. The others still kind of exist.
Right, like acknowledging other gods, but only worshiping one. Monolatry, is that the term?
Exactly, monolatry or henotheism. The source suggests this claim was actually more profound. It's saying there is logically, fundamentally, only one true God. And compared to this one true God, well, the others aren't really gods at all. Not in the same sense.
Wow, okay.
This idea itself, that true divinity is inherently singular, that was incredibly unique, very challenging for the time.
Okay, that distinction is huge. So it's not just about loyalty, it's about the actual nature of God. But if polytheism was everywhere, and this wasn't just like picking a favorite team captain, but saying only one can exist,
yeah,
what's the foundation for that? Why couldn't there be many true gods? What's the argument the source puts forward?
Well, this is where the deep dive gets really fascinating.
Yeah.
The material lays out a kind of logical argument. It starts by asking, what qualities must a truly divine being possess?
Right.
Like non-negotiable characteristics.
Okay.
And the reasoning presented points to things like, well, completeness, being totally self-sufficient, and crucially, being infinite. Utterly limitless, lacking absolutely nothing.
Right. Infinite in every conceivable way. Okay, so walk us through the next logical step then. If we accept that premise, a truly divine being must be complete and infinite. What happens if you imagine, just for argument's sake, that there are two such beings, or more than one? Could there be any difference between them at all, even a tiny one?
Well, according to the logic presented in the source, no. There couldn't be. Because think about it. If there was any difference, any distinction whatsoever between these supposedly complete, infinite beings, maybe one has a quality the other lacks, or exists in a slightly different way. That very difference implies a boundary, a limitation, a lack in at least one of them.
Ah, I see. If one has something the other doesn't, then the second one isn't truly complete or infinite.
Precisely. Or they limit each other by their very existence.
Yeah.
But we started with the definition. Complete and infinite means no lack, no limitation. So, the logical conclusion, the deduction, is that this kind of complete infinite existence, it just can't be multiple. It has to be one. Logically singular.
That's a really powerful line of reasoning.
Yeah.
It reframes the whole thing. It makes the claim for one true God, not just, a religious decree, but almost a philosophical necessity based on the nature of reality itself.
Exactly. It's presented almost like a logical proof.
And the source mentions that others, like ancient philosophers, wrestled with similar ideas about ultimate reality, didn't it?
Yes. Thinkers like Aristotle, for example, use similar logical packs when thinking about a prime mover or ultimate cause. It's not an isolated line of thought, historically speaking.
Okay, so based on that logical foundation, how does the source suggest we reinterpret the first commandment then?
Well, it suggests that maybe, just maybe, the primary intention wasn't just about demanding exclusive worship without explaining why, not just a strict rule. Instead, it could be seen as an attempt to establish a correct understanding of God's fundamental nature.
An understanding that the true God, by definition, has to be singular.
Right. It might have been an invitation to grasp why this is true, not just an order to follow blindly.
So maybe faith and understanding were meant to go hand in hand right from the beginning. The source hints at that.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. That understanding could be the very bedrock of genuine faith. And the material takes it a step further, connecting this correct understanding to something incredibly tangible: human suffering.
How so?
It posits that figures like Moses might have looked at the suffering of the people slavery in Egypt, their hardships, and saw it as stemming, fundamentally, from a flawed understanding of God and reality.
Meaning, because they misunderstood, they were worshiping or relying on things that weren't truly God, false gods, essentially.
Things that were limited, perhaps. Things that couldn't ultimately deliver or sustain them because they weren't the true, complete source. So maybe the suffering was linked to investing hope and worship in the wrong places based on a misunderstanding.
Wow, okay. That completely reframes the purpose of the commandment then. Yeah. So knowing and believing in the true God, the one whose nature is logically singular and infinite, it wasn't just about, religious correctness. It was potentially presented as the actual pathway to liberation, to genuine well-being.
Exactly. Freeing people from the suffering that comes from misunderstanding reality, from placing ultimate trust in things that are inherently limited, or in that ultimate sense, maybe not even real.
So the commandment becomes less of a don't do this and more of a here's the path out of suffering.
Precisely. The source actually calls it a potential declaration of liberation, rooted in this fundamental logical truth about God's nature, aimed at guiding people towards well-being by fostering that correct understanding and belief.
That makes sense.
And the material even notes there's been discussion within religious traditions, over the centuries, about whether the focus sometimes became too much about just the exclusivity rule.
At the expense of this deeper, logical, maybe more liberating meaning.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
That the emphasis on the what the rule sometimes overshadowed the why, the understanding and its implications for freedom and flourishing.
This has definitely been a fascinating journey, hasn't it? We started with what seems like a straightforward, maybe even harsh command. And we've explored its potential historical context, this really compelling logical argument for why God might be understood as singular.
Based on the nature of infinity and completeness.
And then connecting that understanding to this profound idea of liberation from suffering.
Absolutely. It opens up a whole new way of thinking about it. But, while that logic points very strongly towards a singular, true God defined by these ultimate qualities,
there's still a question hanging in the air, isn't there?
There is.
Yeah.
This deep dive naturally pushes us towards the next big question. The source kind of hints at it.
Right. And it's a question for you listening to really wrestle with. If this logic holds, if reason suggests there can only be one truly complete and infinite God, then how do you figure out which one? Among all the concepts of God, all the deities presented by different religions, different philosophies across the world, how do you identify that one true God the logic points to?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? A profoundly significant one. Hopefully, though, this deep dive has given you maybe a new lens, a different angle from which to approach that very question, something to really ponder.